At the Menninger Clinic in Houston, Texas, the sterile white room echoed with the steady beeping of the heart monitor, a sound that should have felt reassuring, but instead made everyone in the emergency bay hold their breath. Ellie lay motionless on the hospital bed, her body so emaciated that every time the blood pressure cuff tightened around her wrist, the bones beneath her skin visibly shifted. Her face was ghostly pale, her skin cold to the touch, as if veiled in a layer of frost. Her pulse was weak. Her body temperature had dropped below normal. It was the third time in 2 months that she'd been rushed to the hospital in a state of unconsciousness due to severe malnutrition. A nurse whispered to the attending physician, "Potassium levels are critically low. Heart rhythm is unstable. If she'd arrived even a little later..." The doctor didn't reply. He only tightened his grip around the stethoscope in his hand. He was all too familiar with patients like Ellie, children not battling cancer or infection, but something far more elusive, their own minds. And that invisible enemy, if left unseen, could destroy them without leaving a single scar on their skin. Ellie stirred amid the haze, opening her eyes to a world wrapped in water. The ceiling above her swam in and out of focus. She could faintly hear someone calling her name, but she didn't bother turning her head. She felt no pain, no fear, just emptiness. As if her soul no longer lived in this body. She couldn't remember what she'd eaten in the past 3 days, or was it 5? A week? The hunger made her dizzy, made her tremble, and yet it gave her a sense of control. Every skipped meal felt like a victory, like she was winning against herself, like she was paying penance for something she couldn't quite name. A voice murmured close to her ear, "We need to transfer her to the specialized treatment unit. She'll need psychological support alongside physical care." The name printed on the chart, Eleanor Jameson, 16 years old. Initial diagnosis, severe anorexia nervosa, moderate to major depressive disorder. Evidence of self-punishment through food restriction. Family history of suicide. A few days later, once her body had been stabilized with fluids and she was strong enough to sit up, Ellie was moved to a private room in the adolescent treatment ward. Afternoon light filtered through the curtains, falling across her wrist like strands of golden thread. She sat silently on the hospital bed, her gaze fixed on something invisible in the air. The machines had gone quiet. No more piercing emergency lights. But inside her, the storm was still howling. That was when the memories began to resurface. She remembered. A childhood where nothing lacked materially, and yet not a single meal had ever felt truly joyful. Her mother, Monica, was a beautiful woman, always impeccably put together. Hair in a neat bun, crimson lips, eyes cold as glass. There were 3 things her mother never forgave: belly fat, stretch marks, and chocolate. "A proper young lady never eats like a man," she would say, her eyes never leaving the digital bathroom scale. By the time she turned 10, Ellie had already learned how to hide food under her bed. She loved chocolate ice cream and potato chips. But the more she loved them, the more terrified she was of her mother finding out. Just the sound of a door opening or a sharp glance from her mother was enough to make her flinch. Meanwhile, her father and younger brother were free to eat pizza, drink soda, and munch on buttered popcorn right in front of their mother without consequence. Once, when Ellie shared a huge slice of cake with her dad, her mother threw the entire dish to the floor and yelled in her father's face, "You're killing yourself and your daughter!" Her father only shrugged, but Ellie, 11 years old at the time, quietly picked up the shattered pieces of cake and didn't touch anything sweet again for months. Puberty hit like an unexpected slap. Her chest began to develop, her hips widened. Her mother started eyeing her like a ticking time bomb. "You're getting fat," she declared, handing Ellie a 1,200-calorie-a-day meal plan like it was a sentence handed down by a judge, and Ellie followed it obediently. Because her mother had told her, "When you're thin enough, you'll be loved." She believed it, as if it were a prophecy. But that prophecy shattered on a winter night when she was 14. Her mother had been gone for 2 weeks, away caring for Ellie's grandmother. At home with just her father and brother, Ellie was free, for the first time, to truly live. She went to a friend's birthday party, ate ice cream, laughed. She even started dating a boy from her class. He took her out for chocolate ice cream and potato chips, her two all-time favorite things. Ellie gained a little weight. When her mother returned, she found candy wrappers in the trash and saw that her daughter had gained weight. She was furious. Ellie had never seen her mother like that before. She tore up Ellie's drawings, threw her diary into the fireplace, and screamed, "You are my greatest failure!" That night, Ellie couldn't sleep. For the next month, the atmosphere at home was unbearably tense. A few unfortunate events followed, and her father, unable to endure it any longer, left the house for good. The blow shattered her mother completely, and one night, she jumped from the third floor of their apartment. She left behind a suicide note with a single line that Ellie would never forget. "I did everything I could to keep her from being ruined." After her mother's death, Ellie began skipping meals relentlessly. She took a part-time job at a convenience store near home. She still tried her best to take care of her younger brother, but she abandoned herself completely, as if by suffering enough, her mother would forgive her. Each time her stomach clenched with hunger, she told herself, "You deserve this. You disappointed her." And so, she faded away, her body light as a sheet of paper, her mind thick with smoke, until the day she could no longer stand. Now, in the stillness of the quiet room, Ellie still didn't cry. She had no tears left. A nurse knocked softly on the door, setting down a glass of protein milk and a small pastry on the table. Ellie didn't touch them. "Sweetheart, you need to eat, so you'll have the strength to walk out in the garden tomorrow." The woman's voice was as gentle as a passing breeze. Ellie looked toward the garden. A lush green space was waiting just outside, but she remained trapped here, in her memories, in the invisible wounds her mother had left behind, in the distorted belief that suffering was the only way to prove her worth. The Houston afternoon was strangely gentle. The late golden sunlight spilled across the stone benches in the hospital garden, and Ellie sat there motionless, like a fragile porcelain statue. She was wrapped in an oversized gray coat over her hospital uniform, her hands tucked between her thighs, knees drawn tightly to her chest. A breeze slipped through the gaps in her bony wrists, making her shiver slightly, but she didn't move. Today was the first time the doctor had allowed her to be outdoors for more than 30 minutes. "Not for relaxation," Ellie murmured silently to herself. "Just to see how long I can last before collapsing." A soft ball rolled toward her, bumping gently against her foot. Ellie looked up, frowning. Someone was walking toward her, not a doctor, not a nurse, but a boy. He looked about 17, sun-kissed skin and messy brown hair tousled by the wind, wearing a white t-shirt with a red heart and bold black lettering that read, "Borrowed time, full speed." On his right wrist was a white plastic band, just like her patient ID bracelet. But somehow, he didn't look like a patient at all. "Sorry about that," he said, his voice bright and clear. "I was practicing throws to kill time, but I guess this ball has a thing for meeting strangers." Ellie didn't respond. She stared at him, as if trying to figure out whether this was some kind of joke, or perhaps part of a new therapy tactic. "I'm Harper," he said, extending a hand without hesitation. "My heart works like an old car, runs with a rattle, rattles until it breaks." She didn't take his hand. He didn't pull it back, just smiled and casually sat down on the bench beside her, as if they'd known each other forever. "One minute I was out on the lawn, the next I'm sitting next to the most mysterious girl in this whole place. Life's weird like that," Harper said, grinning. Ellie glanced at him again. There was a brightness in his eyes, a warmth in his smile. She whispered without looking at him, "I'm not interesting. Or mysterious." "Oh? Then what are you?" "A mistake." Harper went quiet. 1 second, 2. The smile faded. "Yeah," he said softly. "I used to think the same thing about myself, until I found out that a lot of mistakes have saved the world. Penicillin, for example. Mold in a petri dish. Considered a lab disaster at first." She turned to look at him, surprised. Not by the trivia, but by the way Harper said it, like he was carrying a disaster in his own chest. "What's your condition?" she asked. It was the first time she'd spoken to a stranger since arriving at the hospital. "Congenital heart defect. I've got a septum full of holes, arteries twisted like a maze, and a heartbeat that never follows the rules. Doctors said living past 10 would be a miracle. I like to think I'm just God's patience test. Aren't you scared? Harper shrugged, his gaze drifting to the horizon. I used to be. Terrified, actually. But then I realized, when your time is short, every second becomes precious. And something that precious shouldn't be hidden away in the dark. It should be lived fully, shared freely, and savored like it's the last one. Ellie said nothing. His words, so different from the hollow encouragements she was used to, didn't try to fix her, didn't pretend to know better. They simply existed. Harper tapped his fingers lightly against his knee. You don't seem like someone who enjoys talking. I don't like people staying with me too long. Well, that's perfect. I'm not staying long anyway. The words made Ellie freeze. She looked at him, studying his face. Harper didn't say it with drama, but with calm acceptance, like it was something he'd made peace with a long time ago. He explained. I'm waiting for a heart transplant. The list is long, the time is short. But you know what? The shorter it is, the faster I want to live. Ellie felt her chest tighten. A boy, about her age, with a broken heart inside him, yet glowing like sunlight in someone else's life. And her? A healthy body she had cursed every day. She had rejected every sip of milk, every piece of bread, punished herself for simply existing. Harper didn't ask why Ellie was here. He didn't look at her with pity. He just sat beside her, sharing the silence like it was a language of its own. Do you want to paint? Harper asked suddenly. Paint? Ellie stiffened. Her drawings. She hadn't touched a paintbrush since the day her mother ripped her sketchbook apart and threw it in the trash. I gave it up, she said. Harper smiled. Then that's perfect, because if you gave it up and still want to try again, that means it's worth it. She looked up for the first time, meeting his eyes directly. There was no pity in those deep brown eyes, only light. I don't deserve to. Are you still breathing? Yes. Then you deserve to. Silence. A squirrel darted across the lawn, its tiny rustling steps making a cheerful sound in the grass. In the distance, another patient played a ukulele, soft notes rising like tiny brushstrokes against the orange-red canvas of the evening sky. Harper suddenly stood up and held out his hand. Come with me. There's something I want to show you. Ellie hesitated, but somehow she placed her hand in his. Harper's hand was warm and steady, with a few calluses on his fingers, maybe from gripping a tennis racket or playing an instrument. They walked to the far end of the garden, where a low stone wall was covered in ivy. There, among the vines, were scribbled drawings, art left behind by patients who had once been treated here. I painted this one, Harper said, pointing to a large circle containing 2 interwoven heart lines. A broken heart and a friend holding it. Ellie gently touched the rough outline. She didn't know who she might be in that drawing, but for the first time in months, she wasn't afraid. Harper turned to her, his voice quiet. You know, Ellie, life doesn't ask what we want. It just hands us a deck of cards. But how we play them, that's up to us. Ellie looked at him. She didn't say thank you. She didn't cry, but something inside her cracked open. A sliver of sunlight. A name being called back. A tiny, fragile thread of belief, but real. Ellie saw Harper a few more times in the garden after that. They never planned it, never said it out loud, but both somehow knew they'd find each other there after 4 p.m. And yet today, Harper didn't come. The Texas sky hung gray and heavy, strangely quiet. Ellie sat alone on their usual bench, eyes fixed on the empty space where he would normally be. Just yesterday, Harper had been there, telling her about the time he snuck out of the hospital to run in a charity race, only to end up in the ICU right afterward. He had laughed like it was a silly childhood prank, his eyes gleaming like a March lake under sunlight. They said I was crazy, Harper once told her, but at least in that moment, I was truly alive. The last time they saw each other, he had said something Ellie would never forget. Ellie, if I'm not around anymore, promise me one thing, live for me, for the days I won't get to have. She had stayed silent. But for the first time, she felt afraid. Afraid that the one person who had brought light into her life might vanish, just like her mother. And when Harper didn't show up, her heart skipped a beat. She asked the nurses. They shook their heads, eyes avoiding hers. Finally, a young orderly, voice trembling, whispered, "He didn't make it through the night. His heart stopped before the transplant arrived." Ellie's world exploded, but there was no scream, no sobbing, just a vast emptiness cracking open in her chest, as if someone had quietly removed her heart and left behind a hollow, cold and still. Harper left just as gently as he had entered her life, a breeze slipping through, carrying the faint scent of lavender and a laugh that rang like wind chimes. In the hospital's memorial room, there was a small corner where one of Harper's drawings still hung. Beneath it, a wooden plaque read, "Harper Jameson, 17 radiant years. His heart stopped, but his light remains." Ellie stood there, gazing at the painting and the plaque, her hand gripping a folded scrap of old paper. It was the drawing Harper once showed her. 2 intertwined hearts, one large, one small, connected by a single red thread, a symbol of life, of hope, of the belief Harper had always carried. It doesn't have to be perfect, it just has to be real. That evening, for the first time in many days, Ellie didn't refuse the glass of milk. She simply sat by the wide-open window, letting the wind toss her hair, her eyes fixed on the sky, right where Harper had once pointed and said, "That's where I'll go, if one day I'm no longer here." In the stillness of the room, Ellie opened her sketchbook. Her fingers trembled, stiff as if they hadn't held a pencil in years. But then, she began to draw. Not her mother, not the uneaten meals, not the rage in her mother's eyes, but Harper, with his bright eyes, defiant grin, and a heart ablaze in the open wind. She drew him running, not on a treadmill, but across an open field, surrounded by sunlight and wind, laughing as if he were living every heartbeat to its fullest. The next day, Ellie brought the drawing to the memorial room. There, she pinned her picture beside the one Harper had once painted, the 2 interwoven hearts. Beneath it, she wrote in black ink, "I once ran from everything, pain, memories, even myself. But someone, with their weakest heart, showed me how to live the strongest life. He left, but he left behind a rhythm inside me. From now on, I will live, not to repay anyone, but to honor the one who believed I was worth saving." A week later, Ellie sat across from her therapist, and for the first time her voice was not hoarse, not broken. "I want to live," she said. The doctor looked at her, astonished. "Why?" he asked. She didn't cry, but in her eyes was a light that hadn't been there before. Because if someone who was dying could still crave every morning, every ray of sunlight, then me, with a whole, healthy body, what right do I have to turn away from that? She met the doctor's gaze, her voice steady and slow. "I never thought of myself as disabled. But I've come to realize, sometimes, the real disability lives in the soul. And if we keep rejecting love, keep punishing ourselves, then even if we have legs that could run 1,000 miles, we're still nothing more than a shadow." Day by day, Ellie began to change. Not perfectly, not all at once. There were still meals she didn't finish, still nights when she woke from dreams of her mother. But now, after every struggle, she always came back to a single question. If it were Harper, what would he do? And the answer was always, he'd smile and keep going. 3 months later, at her hospital farewell, Ellie asked to say a few words. The activity room fell silent as she stood. She wore a hand-painted dress, its pattern, 2 hearts entwined. Her voice wasn't loud, but it was clear. "I used to hate myself. I wanted to disappear from this world because I felt I wasn't good enough, not beautiful enough, not worthy enough to live. But then I met someone, a boy without a strong heart, without a long future ahead of him, but with a soul that burned bright. He taught me this. When time is running out, every second becomes a treasure, and something that precious should never be hidden away in the dark. It should be lived fully, shared freely, and cherished as if it were the very last one. I will live, because he no longer can, and I know, somewhere out there, he's still smiling." On the day Ellie was discharged, she carried with her a small framed painting, Harper, arms outstretched in a field of wildflowers, under a sky of endless blue. At the bottom, in delicate lettering, were the words, "Who really is the one disabled? Sometimes the greatest lack isn't in the body, but in the way we choose to live." And Ellie, with her once long hair now cut short, her body still thin but her gaze warmed by light, stepped through the gates of the Menninger Clinic. No longer the girl who had tried to disappear from the world, but someone walking back into it. With a heart that, for the first time, was grateful simply to still be beating